and welcome to today's ILFM Lunch and Learn. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today. It's a slightly different format from the usual Lunch and Learn for those of you who've joined before. You're actually joining us for a live episode of the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, which is an interview series that discusses with legal experts the mindsets, behaviours, skills and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, the host and head of marketing at Osprey Approach, who are an all-in-one legal accounting, practice and case management solution that makes running a law firm easier. So today I'm joined by someone that the ILFM members will know very well, but for those of you who perhaps don't know her, my guest is the non-practicing Silex lawyer, former director at an Oxfordshire law firm and now head of professional development at the ILFM, Karen Edwards. Welcome, Karen. Thank you for joining me.
That's okay.
And the members today. So today we'll be discussing lessons learned from switching and moving legal software solutions that will help increase return on investment. We'll cover best practices and top tips for successfully migrating and implementing a new practice and case management system. We'll discuss how to move your data, what questions you should be considering, advice for building the right internal team to help with the move, and much more. Normally, we start by asking the guest's background and experience in the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast. But I want to specifically ask you, Karen, about your experience in switching and migrating practice and case management systems, which has helped you glean the lessons that you're going to share for us today.
Of course, yeah. So as you know, prior to joining the ILFM about 18 months ago, I've worked in various law firms, and throughout that time, we have changed quite a few systems. And I was involved in quite a lot of those transitions as well in various different aspects. But it's been quite an interesting time and experience to glean mistakes, learnings, things that work, things that haven't, and that been able to bring that forward into future roles before I joined the ILFM. And lots of different reasons, and also lots of different firms that have different needs and requirements, which is one of the things we will come on to talk about once we get deeper into the questions about what would be a suitable system for your firm. It's a very sort of particular thing for every firm. It's not a one size fits all. So it's been quite an interesting experience for me over the years, quite a few years, to glean those learnings about what makes a successful migration transition from system to system, because some firms will go through multiple migrations. Some firms might like one system and stick with it, and that works. So having gone through quite a few different ones, it's been quite eye-opening, but also being able to then give back and pass some of those learnings on, experiences to members when we get quite a few people coming through asking for tips or suggestions or ideas or just help with some conundrums or challenges that they might be facing. So it's really great that I can then bring that as well. So yeah, we'll go through a lot, but it's, I would say, spanning over about where are we now, 14, 15 years or so, possibly, maybe a bit more, migrating multiple systems and changing different systems, and just from a people perspective as well, how that can be quite challenging. So I'm sure we'll come on to all of that in a bit more detail, but that's kind of like my background of where I've been involved in that sort of thing over my career.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. And that's exactly why I'm interviewing you today, because you've got all that knowledge from your successes and actually probably slightly more knowledge from your failures, if we can call them that, that has helped you know what is the most successful thing to do, what's the most effective thing to do. So in the latest LPM Frontiers report, which is an analysis of 60 SME law firms across the UK, building a more agile and digital culture was the joint first business area that firms believed are critical to success. So it's clear that firms have got tech on the radar in order to stay competitive. But in the same report, 35% of firms believe they need to realise a better ROI on their tech. So this is sort of telling me that whilst firms are aware of the benefits of tech, perhaps they're not reaping the rewards, or they're not feeling like they're reaping the rewards. So that's why we want to sort of dedicate this session to switching systems, because the effectiveness of the migration is going to correlate and impact the long-term success and ROI of the system. So we'll just start by sharing your 3 lessons that you've learned from implementing a new system, and then we'll dive into each one as we progress.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to start off with, making sure that you ask the right questions, I think, is crucial throughout an implementation and migration project, to ensure that you are investing in the right products, because it's one of the biggest investments a firm can make. And so, you need to get it right as much as possible, and you need to sort of tailor it to your services and the firm that you have. And the I think the project should actually be kick-started really by asking some internal questions of what is required and expected from the investment. So, ideally you want to understand, what your firm needs, be very clear on what your firm needs and wants before you choose a system. I think some firms fall into the trap of wanting to change and improve their systems and become more productive, move with the times, and sometimes they maybe don't spend enough time doing the due diligence to make sure that they are finding a system that fits them, not the other way around. And we see a lot of mistakes, particularly when we get member queries coming through, and we do get quite a lot where this has happened. And within a very short time scale, they're having to backtrack and going back to a different system that they've just left, or they're finding a completely different system again. So within a short period of time, they're changing 3 systems. So that's going to have a huge impact, obviously, on productivity and bottom line, and just the productivity and the happiness of the workplace as well, because that, changing, not a lot of people like change, and that can be quite a challenging time as well. So, it is a big deal to change your practice management system, and it will shape the way you and your team work. So understanding what your current challenges and goals are, clearly thinking about what you need from a new system is critical. What are the things that you are trying to fix, whether it's productivity, whether you want to bring in automation, efficiencies, better management information, financial information. There's lots of elements to these systems. So having a clear idea as to where you are trying to go, what your strategies are, what your aims are, and how that you can find a technology solution that fits that. You don't want to set your firm up to fail, and we see that actually quite a lot. So imagine if a system did fail to meet the needs of this team, whether that's, poor usability, the user face, the way you access it, the way it looks, the way you use it, not just so much the technicality of it, but just actually using it on a day-to-day basis, or the essential features aren't there that maybe you thought there would be, or your existing workflows are incompatible. So, the backlash from the people that are going to be using it on the day-to-day basis, that are going to struggle with disruptions of their daily work, it's going to make them more efficient. So there's a lot of things that it can have a knock-on effect. So it's not just an inconvenience if you get disgruntled employees that are dissatisfied with the system that you've implemented. It has effect on productivity, client satisfaction as well, because they'll pick up on your team satisfaction and being able to work with technology. And we said ultimately the firm's bottom line. So think beyond the way that you're currently doing things. Identify issues that, as I said, that you're trying to fix. So compliance issues as well, client care, inefficiencies, bottlenecks, where things are being held up is essential. But also understanding what you must need as opposed to the nice to haves. Sometimes a lot of people can get caught up, I said, in wanting to have the nicest new fads, where it's actually thinking about what the essentials and the must-haves to make your firm more productive and better at servicing your clients. And just how your overall operations can be improved. So I think that's sort of a key one, is really understand what it is that you need from a system, to better provide your services and better provide what your employees need to do their jobs, rather than trying to sort of reverse engineer it, if that makes sense. So I'd say that was probably the first big one. The second one, I think, is to get engagement from the outset from your whole team. I think buy-in is so important, the whole change management piece, and we'll come on to a little bit more about that, I'm sure, in a bit more detail later. But where it's very difficult, I think, to implement a system that's going to have such a radical change on your firm in terms of the way that your employees work, the clients are serviced, finances are run, without getting engagement from the people that are going to be using it, and to make sure that you're not just having a silo of a team that are going out and sourcing and finding and implementing something that nobody else has any idea about what it's going to be doing, or whether it's actually going to be good or helpful for the people that are actually using it for that part of the business. So rather than just maybe having an IT team that's going out sourcing something that has no idea what the accounts team need for it to work, to be compliant, to provide the firm's partners or directors with the management information. All of these things need to be thought through from the people that are actually going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really important to bring your people along on that journey from all areas of the business. So ensure they are involved in conversations and demonstrations and ensure their thoughts and opinions are taken into account, because they're going to understand and use the system from a different perspective and probably better and deeper at a deeper level than you're going to, or the sort of senior leadership team may well be using it. So and one of the examples we had recently where that actually happened, where we had a member firm who came to us recently asking for some advice, because they've literally moved from one system, I'm not going to name them, but one system to another, and then within 3 months found that the financial package wasn't working for them. And they obviously didn't do enough due diligence on that. And so they've decided to go back to the previous system after only 3 months. And so the downtime, the disruption, the cost involved in that is going to be, going to be huge. So definitely get buy-in from your team and engagement, and just making sure you're bringing everybody along on that journey. And then I think finally, from my perspective, I mean, there are loads of lessons that can be learned, but I think one of the things that we learned in the past as well is really understand fully the longer term future investment requirements of systems. So, short, medium, long term, does your firm have the cash flow to support that? Is there a plan in place to address that? So, for example, a lot of systems are out of the box and require minimum customization and development. And I've used a few of them in the past as well, or they're simple enough and intuitive enough that you can kind of train your in-house staff or employees or certain people to do what you need to do. And depending on obviously what you want to achieve. And then there are some systems that you buy the kind of the basic shell, and then you have to develop it and customize it a lot more to get what you want out of it, to get the best ROI, again, depending on what you're wanting it for, which of course is expensive in both time and money. So is that properly understood and planned for? You can have demonstrations and these systems are all kitted out, all singing, all dancing, because they've had amazing customizations built in, but you might be getting just the basic shell, and you're having to then invest tens of thousands of pounds in either a consultancy team or investing in more staff internally to just fully focus on customizing and developing that system to better work for you for what you need. So really costing it out and really understanding, again, what is it you need, and is that system going to work for you, or out of the box, or are you going to have to invest a lot more money over a longer period of time, and are those expectations going to be managed as well? So I think those are kind of the top three, just from my previous experience. I'm sure there'll be lots of others that people have got as well.
Yeah, it's a great start. So much to unpack from that. So we've got lesson one is about asking the right questions, knowing your goals and objectives. Lesson two is about getting buy-in, working as a team, collaborating across the firm to make sure it meets your needs. And lesson three is about understanding the future, thinking about future-proofing yourself, thinking about the future of the product, thinking about what investment that requires. And we're going to dive deeper into those in just a second. But there was also some other things that definitely require a whole other podcast to discuss. But there was things you mentioned in there like training and service. What does the supplier offer? Is it just the product? Are you getting a partner? I think there's stuff about success measures in there. How do you measure the success of your system? When do you know that it's met what you wanted it to do? So there's so much to dive into. But I think we'll start with the asking the right questions, because that is absolutely crucial. And you shared some of the sort of experience you've heard from members where it's not gone to plan, perhaps because the questions wasn't asked at the outset. So I think the project can be kickstarted by several internal questions, like you said. So can you share some examples or tips for asking the right questions, and how to get that information from the outset?
Yeah, I mean, I think understanding as well, I think initially timescales and timeframes, I think a lot of firms will sometimes want to rush into a system because they want to move to something. They want to start to see returns very quickly, or they want to feel like they're getting up to speed with the rest of the marketplace to be competitive, and it's great to be ambitious, I think, with timescales. It's great to embrace innovation and change, and there are some good things out there that can be achieved from picking systems and being innovative and looking at new solutions, but trying to be realistic with your timeframes. I think sometimes firms can rush into transitioning too quickly, and then they don't sort of stop and think and start asking themselves the right questions to look at what is the right solution for them. I think it helps motivate your team as well, because as well, being in situations where there have been conversations around moving systems, and there's a planned live date in about 4 months, and everyone just goes, whoa, like we've got our day jobs to do. Like, how are we going to fit that in? Who's going to do it? Is there going to be a project team? Are we meant to sort of down tools and just focus on this performance? Because I don't think people realize the amount of time and investment it takes to implement this kind of project. It's a massive thing. And most of the people within the firm have got day jobs to do, haven't they? So it's I think that will demotivate or motivate depending on sort of what timescales you're throwing out to your team. We're going to be going live in a few months or maybe 6 months, a year. So I think it's important to be both realistic and pragmatic when planning a major kind of migration project. And again, really scoping out the cost of what it is you're wanting to spend, what you've got in reserves, what you might need to borrow, really understanding the solution and speaking to the suppliers to say what is available out of the box, whether it's a cloud-based solution on premise, and how does the system how can it be customized? Is depending on what you want. Every firm's different. I think this is a thing, is that there is no one size fits all. So there are lots of great systems out there which do great things, but one system will do amazing things for one firm, won't do amazing things for another firm. It really depends on what your focus is as a firm, what services you offer. So really making sure you've got the funding, the cash flow, and yeah, speaking with your stakeholders to understand exactly what's needed, and whether you've got the internal resource as well, or whether you might have to go outside for that. Like you say, there's some systems and suppliers will work with consultancy third parties that can do a lot of this stuff for you. But of course, that's going to come at a cost, but that might be cheaper than hiring somebody in. So lots of workings out in terms of scoping out the cost for that. And also, I think, yeah, linked to kind of the timescales, but I think a lot of mistakes, frustrations arise when you're not spending the time and money just focusing on the migration of the data and understanding what the data aspect of that transition is going to look like. Particularly if firms have been going for a long time, perhaps may have used different systems. They're going to have hang-ups, legacy hang-ups on all the different systems that they've transferred over. And maybe perhaps lots of old or duplicated data as well. So you don't want to keep transferring old data. And we've always heard that, adage, rubbish in, rubbish out, and it's useful to undertake an exercise beforehand on cleansing as much of that data as possible. So really understanding where's our starting point going to be. So, firms may need to require investment in temporary or holiday staff. That's quite a common thing that we see to help sort of cleanse that data, because again, that's quite a time-consuming exercise, particularly if you're a firm that's been going a long time. Imagine all those records of clients and contacts and everything that you've got, and the thought of somebody having to go through that already in your firm and kind of cleanse that and try it as much as possible, depending on how much data you've got, obviously, can be quite a daunting thing. So, there are some systems that can be used fresh from day one. There are a lot of ones that you can just transfer opening balances on, for example. But then you've got to ensure you've got access to the previous system that's kept in case you need to access the records and data. And of course, you've got compliance requirements about record keeping for a minimum number of time as well. So it's really as well asking yourself, what are we going to do with the data? How are we going to transfer the data? Is we going to transfer over everything? How's that going to work? Can that work? I think that's also because not every system is compatible in terms of transferring all the data fields across. And if we're not going to do that, how are we going to keep access to the previous data? And the whole cleansing exercise as well is a very important one. It's something that is quite a difficult one to achieve. It's over the whole various different migrations we've done or we did in the past. I don't think we ever really managed to do that. But it's one of the big tips and the big recommendations that come out of learnings from moving data across, is to really make sure you're cleansing it as much as possible. But it is easier said than done. If you're a firm that's been going 100 years and you've got all these different records and lots of duplicates, and it's taking the time to get that done before you even start migrating could put your whole transition project back quite substantially. So it's not an easy thing, but I think that's a good tip if you're, if you're thinking about moving in a few years' time to a new system, start thinking about your data now. I think the data going into your systems actually is probably one of the most important things to be thinking about before you even start looking at transitioning over. Because you don't want to be working with rubbish data every day. It just slows you down. And then also you don't want to be transferring old data over either. So and I think finally as well, looking at your training, I think asking questions around your training, making sure that you're focusing on the training piece is quite a big thing when you're moving to different systems as well, and making sure it's accurate, but also done at the right time. You don't want to do it too early and then everyone forgets something. If you're doing it 2 or 3 months before your go live date, there's a chance that a lot of that stuff's going to be forgotten because you're still using the current system. But also you're going to want to make sure it's not done too close because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. So I think making sure the training is accurate and done at the right time as well, to minimize kind of like downtime and disruption around the go live date would be good, so that people are trying to get used to the system and kind of flying with it as quickly as possible to start getting those returns coming in quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's never too early to work on your data. Just an FYI, it's definitely never too early. And I think thinking about the timescales is super key. Not even just necessarily the actual implementation time. I mean, depending on the size of your firm and the amount of data, we can migrate you in a couple of weeks. It's not the actual implementation, it's the prepping for that. It's doing the demos, it's asking the questions, it's spending time internally. And you mentioned earlier about writing down your needs and wishes. And actually, I think never assume anything. Never assume that the system will do what you think it will. Never assume that the supplier will know what you mean. I think actually you can write the most basic things down in that wish list and that need list that will really help you in that process and will really guide the supplier to know if the system is valuable enough for you. Training is such a huge thing and will help massively with the ROI, and it links directly to what you said, Karen, about the communication and getting buy-in as soon as possible. That links definitely. But let's dive into data. Just as an FYI, we do have a data episode on our podcast, so it might be worth diving deeper into that. But Karen, from your point of view, we often see firms stay with legacy systems just because they can't. The thought of moving the data is just too much. What are your best practices for successfully migrating the data? Where to start?
Yeah, especially I mean the first firm that I worked in where we migrated, I mean they'd be going for over 100 years at that point. And obviously there were lots of manual records years ago, but there was quite a lot of multiple duplicated data out of date. And I think we talked about earlier, but in terms of the data, just starting now, like even if you're not even thinking about, we'll come back to the transition and the migration, and I'm sure you talk about this on your data podcast as well. But I think it's so important to even just on a day-to-day basis, just making sure that your data is clean and you're just looking at it and cleansing it as you're going along. Like if somebody sees a duplication record in a system, and there's no other records attached to it, it's just a duplicate sitting there. There's no documents, there's no matters open, there's no relationship contact information going on anywhere, and it can be deleted, just delete it. If somebody's got the authority to do that, or speak to the person that does if it needs an administrator to do it. But just finding a way of just managing that on a day-to-day basis anyway is just so crucial. But I think that's the biggest thing, is when you've got years and years and years of records. But I think a lot of it is because a lot of that data could be unusable, or it's just not good data anymore. It's old, it's duplicated, it's out of date, and obviously we've got to be sure around data protection nowadays. There's a lot, that's a whole different issue. But ensuring we've got up to date information, up to date contact details. And I think having so many records and thinking, oh, how is this going to be done is quite a daunting prospect. And I think that definitely firms need to know that there's going to be a smooth transition process. So I think making sure you understand who's going to be responsible for migrating the data and how that's done, whether it's like the supplier itself. Sometimes, as we said earlier, they engage consultancy firms that are specialists, because it's quite a technical exercise, this as well, all the data mapping. If you think about, and I think it is not just a case of migrating the data, and as Amy mentioned earlier, it's the preparation for it. You'll be getting lots of information coming to you with checklists and mapping spreadsheets, and this field has got to be mapped to that field. And a lot of these systems don't have the same referencing keys and the same sort of fields where the data sits. And you've got to, really go back to basics and say, right, this is a list of all our files. This is what we want them to be called, or this is our chart of accounts. This is what this one's going to be called. And it's quite there's quite a lot to it, particularly if you are going to be migrating everything over. So I think what you want to do really is understand, are we going to migrate all of the data? Are we going to migrate some of the data? Because it depends on what system you're going from and to, and how the data can come out of your current system to go into the new one. So lots of different systems will have different accessibility requirements around it. But trying to work out whether you want to transition at all, and what does that mean in terms of keeping the old data? Do you want to just start afresh with a brand new system with opening balances? All new matters are opened on a new system. Your old system is kept open as and you're kind of working dual systems and running one down while you're opening up another one. Some firms have done that. I wouldn't advocate that. That's not something I would choose to do, but I know firms have done it that way. So I think depending on the amount of data you've got, the state that it's in, the time, the resource, that you've got to invest in this, your timescales, again, your expectations is to work out how you're going to migrate the data. All, nothing, somewhere in between. And again, that will also be dependent on the system that you're hoping or wanting to go to as well. And then I think depending on what you've decided to do, making sure that you've got enough test migrations, I think making sure you do enough trial runs as well. Sometimes in the past that hasn't been done enough. And so making sure that where you are able to transition all or some of the data, you're looking at how that is actually then being receptive in the new system and making sure that the balances are right, the references are right, the documents are in the right place, the client information's right, and doing a sample of that. But again, it's making sure who's going to resource that, who's going to check it. So that's quite a time-consuming exercise as well. And I think, a common pitfall to be wary of is the ongoing accessibility of your data. Law firms hold an extremely huge amount of data, and it's really important to them. Some providers, will impose restrictions and costs if you want to extract it in the future. As we said, check about your provider that you're leaving about ongoing accessibility. Otherwise, you may find yourself incurring unexpected costs if you want to achieve it in the future. Again, we talked about compliance requirements of ensuring storage, record keeping to be aware of. So if you're keeping one system open, moving to a new one, and you're not taking all the data, how are you going to satisfy those requirements of record keeping to be able to go back and access past information if you need to? So I think working with your new provider to confirm whether that will be necessary, speaking with the old one about decommissioning that system accordingly as and when those timescales are relevant. But yeah, I think be prepared if you're migrating your data. I think the biggest thing to do is, as we said earlier, I think the biggest starting point is to make sure that your data that you've got transferring over, however you're going to do it, is in the best shape possible before you start, because otherwise you are just going to be transferring historical issues from one to another, and you're never going to deal with it. You're never going to get rid of it. Clean up your clients and matters, write off your old WIP, your disbursements, your debtors, reconcile your accounts, which you should be doing anyway. But it's not unusual to find these problems when you're going through this process. So before you attempt to fix them in your new system, try and do it in the old one before you migrate. So otherwise it's just going to keep compounding the issues, and you're just never going to get, you're never going to get to that stage. So I suppose the data points that they should consider thinking about during the migration process that you might want to just start clearing, matter information, key dates, contact information, documents, emails, calendar appointments. It depends the sort of systems you're moving from and to, and what the current capability is and what you're going to. But obviously, particularly the financials as well, the office and client accounts. And just making sure that you're testing it enough. Just, make sure you have enough demos. Can't really overstate the importance of investing that time to really test that new solution to make sure that it is actually what you want for what you are trying to achieve. So making sure that you're doing that. So the migration, testing the system to make sure it's meeting your needs, making sure you're cleaning up your data as early as possible, if not doing it already every day, is part of your kind of just daily working practices anyway. So I think that's probably the kind of top key things around data. I mean, we can get into more technical aspects, which I'm not a technical expert on data migrations, but I think just in terms of capturing those key issues around data migration and where the kind of common pitfalls are, making sure that cleansing it, making sure you know what you're wanting to migrate from the first day, and then yeah, testing as much as possible before you go live.
Yeah, really great top tips there. And actually, I just want to touch on, well, firstly, I just want to say make sure you're quizzing your supplier. Ask them these questions. Like, they're more than happy to answer them for you, and they should be able to assist you and share all that with you in what it looks like to change. Do we get trial samples, which is a great tip? Absolutely. You should be seeing what a trial sample of your data looks like in the new system. That is a great shout. Ask them about where this is stored, how you access it back, all that good stuff is definitely quiz your supplier. I think one of the other things to mention as well in terms of cleansing your data is actually not necessarily the data that you've inputted, but looking at the data fields that you have on your system. A very common thing we get is perhaps a custom data field has been added to your case management system, maybe for a particular marketing campaign, or someone had a bright idea to say, let's capture this information. And actually, the field was never completed, or it was completed 5 times and forgotten about. And it's those sort of things that you need to consider. Do we really need to move that over? Do we really need to consider that field? Is that going to be helpful for us moving forward? So it's not even just the amount of stuff you've got per client per matter, but actually the individual fields that you collect is definitely worth reviewing and cleansing.
That's a really great shout, actually. We did quite a lot of customization of data fields in a previous system, and you kind of forget how much you change and add, really.
Mm.
And so when you come to then do migration, you kind of have to then extract all the fields and almost do a sense check of what you've got. You only then sit back and think, oh well, that's not really necessary. That's never been filled in. That's just going to be adding time, we'll remove that. We don't need it. So it's amazing how many extra fields you can create potentially that's just never going to get used. And again, like you say, they'll end up getting mapped across as well. And you get a chance as part of your preparation to review those sorts of fields that are there and make that decision about whether that's going to go across or not, whether that's necessary, whether that's just going to add more time. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. And often your supplier will help you with the data import. They will help you with the configuration. They will help you with the mapping. They will do that for you. They will move your 2 million files over to the other system. The responsibility for the firm is to understand what fields you want to move and to get that out of the system. So that's the key to think about. Don't worry so much about actually inputting it into the system. The supplier will typically do that for you. Just to move on so we don't run out of time, because we could definitely talk about data all day. You spoke about your other lesson was buy-in and making sure that people in the firm are bought into the system. Um, and I've heard you talk about previously as well about assigning champions across departments. I'd love to sort of talk about that. What are your tips for building a successful implementation team, for getting buy-in within the team for when you're moving?
Yeah, I think it was so cool. Yeah, we talked about it earlier. I mean, having buy-in and getting engagement for all the different key areas of the business, from the fee earners and to the support staff, finance function, general operations, we're all going to be using the systems in different ways. So I think getting collaboration from teams and management, the senior leadership team, whoever's going to sort of be running the project and making that overall decision, is crucial to ensure that you're getting a suitable system with the right features and functionality, making sure that time is invested in. Definitely getting the buy-in. Get the entire team on board at the outset. Really, they need to be involved and engaged in the process. And previously we've had super users, champions. I mean, the lots of firms call them different things, but it can be involved in having somebody that's quite, I don't know, who might want to be involved, who's quite tech savvy, who might quite like that sort of thing. He wants to kind of feedback, whether that's in terms of feeding back on some of the challenges, things they like about the system, things they don't like about the system, things they'd like to see in a new system, having somebody that can help almost super user train their little team. So if you don't have a lot of training resource, potentially some firms have previously have somebody nominated within that department or within that particular area of the business that gets trained maybe to a deeper level on the system that can then feed that down into their teams as and when. So they're kind of at their first port of call as an ongoing training requirement as well, because you're never going to remember everything from day one. There's always going to be ongoing training, and just keep training people all the time. Like there's new stuff coming out. There's lots of systems have so many things it can do, and you can't, eat the elephant in one go. But having somebody, a port of call that you can go to who knows the system on a deeper level, that isn't necessarily maybe the IT team, that doesn't always know how you need things to work, or maybe can speak your language. So having somebody that you can relate to that does the same role as you potentially, that can help you look at it from your perspective, I think is really key. But obviously they've got to have the capacity to commit the time required. So that's got to be factored in. And part of that's all part of the scope of the project anyway. Considering other projects that they might be involved in, whether they've got time that could be released from that. And that's part of all the effective planning. But I think each system works in its own way as well. Many systems are flexible enough to be configured to suit different scenarios, but I think the secret to effect change really is enabling, encouraging your people to adopt new ways of working. It's all about like the change management piece as well, but and supported by the technology, not forced by it. So making people feel like this is going to enhance their role, it's going to better their role, it's going to add to their role, but they're not being forced into something that's not really going to work for them. So I think having that engagement and buy-in and people invested and listened to is really key. And the other thing I would say is do listen to feedback. I think sometimes we hear from members where they have been maybe asked questions and they have fed things back, but then they haven't maybe necessarily felt listened to, that maybe it was just an exercise that the firm had gone through because they felt like they needed to do it, but then the people that were giving the feedback didn't feel listened to and it wasn't taken on board. And then they were just lumbered with a system that didn't quite work for them. And then they've had to transition again within a few months. So I think do listen to, request feedback, but maybe do listen to feedback. I think it's really important to hear from the people that are going to be using the system day in, day out. Engaging with them, understanding their needs, I think can prevent the pitfalls of a poor system choice, which we've seen. So yeah, I think it's a whole change management issue as well. But I think the biggest way to get people along your journey is to really engage with them from the outset. Create like a project team separate from maybe the senior partners or the senior leadership team who might be going out and sourcing the info, because not everybody, you can't have management by consent, you can't have a whole team making a decision, like 20 people saying yes or no to a system. But I think having a team that can feed into those decision makings, look at what the strategic goals are, what they need from systems, what does the finance team need. No one is going to know that better than the finance team, right? So they need to be involved in that conversation and they need to be heard, and that needs to be listened to and fed into the due diligence that then goes into looking at a system that's going to hopefully match most of that. As I said, there is no perfect system, not in here saying there is, but and there is no one system that will fit every firm. But I think making sure that you are, as much as possible, taking on that feedback, listening to your team, will help you get the best solution out there for what you need. And so that when you're going live with a new system and people are effectively trained and they feel like this is a system that will work for them and positively impact their role, that they feel listened to, and hopefully once you get past that go live stage, then some of those pitfalls and frustrations that we see sometimes with systems that are just not working for people will hopefully kind of be minimized.
I love the idea of the super users to buddy up for training. I think that's a great shout, and we see a lot of success with that. Like you said, they speak their language, whether that's by department or by role. Sometimes that
Yeah,
can work really well as well,
yeah,
and they can be your feedback groups, and they can be the one that feeds back to you in what needs changing or how do we best use it for this. And then again, quiz your supplier, utilize their account management, client success teams, utilize their support to say, look, we've got this problem, we'd really love to do this. What's the best practice for you? Don't be afraid to ask them their questions because your tech supplier will be super passionate about that and will love to help you. And yeah, I love that feedback loop. And it's continuous. Like you said, a system is so huge on day one. It's a lot to take in. Make sure you've got your essentials, make sure you've got your fundamentals. And this process just continues to cycle to allow you to make the most of all those features that you could never remember on day one or never use. And then things are new that are released as well. Your software's on a development cycle of releasing new, great, shiny things that sometimes you forget even existed. So making sure that's continuous, I think that's a really great recommendation.
Yeah, and I think, like say, tailoring it to the roles and departments because the training will be different, the needs and the requirements will be different depending on what area of law you're servicing. We know conveyancing is very different to family law, for example. And so I think when updates and releases come in, that's a great way of having somebody that can absorb, that's capable of absorbing, whether intellectually, time, whatever capacity that looks like, they can take on board those the new updates, the training requirements, and they can feed them down into the people that need them in the way that they need them. But also for people that, it also creates a funnel and a more streamlined approach of getting feedback and questions coming through. Because I don't know, I mean, I've worked in teams where, project teams where we say, give us your feedback, give us your questions, and whew, 100, 200 emails are all coming in at once. So I think having a more streamlined funnel approach where you've got somebody who's that feedback conduit, if you like, for that particular person. They can take on the questions and the feedback, and some people might not feel confident or they might not want to kind of direct questions to people directly. They might want to go through somebody that they're maybe a bit more trustworthy with, or they just feel more comfortable opening up to, or whatever it might be. That can be the sort of the intermediary person that can then feed it back. So again, it's just a bit more controlled, a bit more contained. It's not a kind of a free for all. And that's a good way of approaching it as well. So that's why I quite like having those individual people within areas, roles, teams, however it works for your firm, whatever your structure looks like. But yeah, rather than just having sort of everybody coming in at once, having a kind of more controlled, structured environment for feedback is really good.
Yeah, great advice. And yeah, we see so much success with that in rolling out systems and utilizing it to the best advantage. This is such a huge topic. We could definitely talk for hours on implementing and migrating systems.
I mean, I just love the technology. Like, there are so many great systems out there that can do so much and that can do so many great things. And sometimes I think it's almost too much. Like, some firms are just,
Mm.
when they're looking for new solutions, like, where do you even start? Because there's just so many offerings. But I think really understanding, like you say, initially, just documenting what is it you need. I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed by the choice of the marketplace now. Like, at one point, there was only a few, there wasn't that many, because technology's come on so quickly over the last few years, hasn't it? There's been so many more entrants to the market. There's just so much choice out there now, and it's such an expensive investment. I think sometimes firms are fearful of making one decision because we have seen it, and the cost and implications of that of getting it wrong are huge. But mistakes do happen. But I think trying to preempt that as much as possible would be really key, and hopefully some of the lessons today will help people. But yeah, I mean, I love innovation and technology. So like, if people are thinking about doing it or changing, or it's a great thing to do. It's the way forward. But yeah, it can be quite a daunting exercise for a lot of firms, particularly small and medium firms that might not necessarily have the resource or expertise to call on.
Yeah, and I guess it's also important to realize that you're going to have a mix of those people within your team. So you're going to have people who are very much like you and are like, yes, let's have change, let's get new systems, I'm really up for it. You're also going to have people who are like, I feel like I've only just learned this one. I can't think to change again. And I guess that's where that communication bit comes in, where that buddy up of super users comes in. And also really leaning on your supplier. I know I've said it loads, but quiz them, lean on their services to help you in this situation. And I think, I don't know if Karen, if you want to do a final sort of point to wrap it up, but I think a final point from me and everything we've discussed is to start as early as possible. It's never too early to think about your data. It's never too early to think about your options or what you really need as a business. Even if your contract or your project isn't for 2 years, actually, we see the most success of people coming to the market and having a look around between sort of 6 to 9 months before they really want to move. That's where we see the most success. So for us, it's definitely about starting early as possible, get those thoughts and questions out there, and yeah, lean on your supplier, quiz them, lean on their services.
Yeah, and I think definitely picking a supplier that has sort of really good customer service record or a great support team can't be underestimated. Again, I think a lot of people move suppliers because they're not very good with their customer service or support. So I think making sure you have somebody that, like you say, is really supportive, who is gonna work for you on that. But yeah, data, never too early to work on your data. Just do it now, just start doing it as part of your daily practices anyway. It's a good habit to get into, even if you're not thinking about changing systems, just having good data anyway. There are so many issues around that anyway, just from productivity, day-to-day working practices, compliance, data protection, all of that stuff. It should be worked on anyway, as a matter of course. Yeah, really understanding what you need, not just sort of shooting from the hip and knee jerking to get a new system because you think you need one. And just going for something that looks nice, that's maybe cost effective, that looks cheap, or whatever it might be that you need, just really, really spend the time thinking about what it is you need and making sure you find the solution that best fits that, with taking into account a project team, a wider project team of everybody, that's all the relevant stakeholders that you can listen and take feedback from, that are going to be using the system. Really make sure that you're taking on board their thoughts and feedback.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for letting me pick your brains, Karen. We definitely need another
I
episode
love
soon.
your
And like I
subject.
said, there's other episodes on data migration and other stuff at the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, which you can find at ospreyapproach.com.
Thank you everybody for joining. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Pleasure to see you all. Thanks.